Welcome to the Visual COBOL in a Nutshell series of presentations. This module will cover various methods that can be used to import existing COBOL applications into Visual COBOL for Visual Studio. An important step in using the Visual COBOL product is to get your current COBOL applications up and running in a Visual COBOL project as soon as possible. There are a variety of tools available to help accomplish this task. The best tool for you is really dependent on the format of your current application. This presentation will cover the following four tools: the NetExpress Import Wizard, the Project from Existing Code Wizard, Add Existing COBOL Items, and Add Existing Files. If you are currently using the NetExpress product for development and your application is stored in one or more NetExpress project files, then the NetExpress Import Wizard can help you to get to Visual COBOL very quickly. This wizard will create one or more Visual COBOL projects from the information found within a specified NetExpress project file. The new projects will retain the same build settings and folder structure as the original NetExpress project, which helps keep the learning curve to a minimum. Settings retained include compiler directives, environment variables, and linker options. Let's look at an example. Okay, let's first take a look at our current NetExpress project. This project contains the MF Support Info utility, which is a tool used by support line to get a snapshot of your development environment. This tool is provided for in both NetExpress and Visual COBOL products. Okay, in our project window, we can see this is set as a generic debug build. It contains two executable files, the first being a main program, mfsupportinfo.exe. That consists of a single source program, a COBOL source, along with a resource file that contains certain versioning information that's linked into the exe. And our second output file is a DLL, mfsupportlive.dll, that is made up of a number of different COBOL programs that are all linked together into the single DLL. Okay, if we look at our main program, we can see that DLL is loaded by doing a set procedure pointer to entry. So it assumes that that DLL will be located either in the current directory or somewhere within the path. If we look up at our project properties, for directives, we can see that there are certain compiler directives that are being set, which will have to be moved over to our new project. And in our environment settings, we also have copy, which is set to point to the location of copy files, the folder containing the copy files, which happen to be in MF Support copy files, which is a subfolder of the project folder. Okay. If we look at our build settings, for the exe on the link tab, we can see it's being linked as shared dynamic, character-based application with an entry point of MF Support Info. Likewise for the DLL. Also on the Advanced tab for the DLL, which makes several Windows API calls, it links to these Windows import libraries, so those are also specified here. Those will have to be brought over as well. Okay, if we go ahead and we build this, we'll see that it builds fine without any errors or warnings. And when we run it, it will simply generate a log file containing information and give us a message to that effect. Okay, so our goal here is to take this and bring it over into Visual COBOL. And we can do that by bringing up Visual COBOL for Visual Studio 2012. Okay, before we begin, let me show you what the current folder looks like. For the NetExpress project, it's just a folder called MF Support Info. It has a debug folder, which is standard in NetExpress as the output folder, either debug or release, and that's where it will generate all of its executables and debugging information. Okay, in order to bring this over and import it into Visual COBOL, we go under File, Open, and Project and Solution, and we navigate to that same folder and point to the project file, which is NetExpress project file with the .app extension. If we double click on that to open it, we'll get a dialog for a one-way upgrade. If we click OK, it'll go ahead and start the import process. Okay. Now it will generate all this information, the new solution and the new projects, in the same folder that you were in NetExpress. So we see there's new information here, new files generated. So if you are continuing to use your NetExpress project under NetExpress, you may want to make a copy before doing the import, because it will assume that it has control over that folder. Okay, if we look at what was generated, we have a new solution called MF Support Info, and we have two projects in there, one for the EXE and one for the DLL. In Visual COBOL, an EXE and a DLL cannot be within the same project, so there would be a separate project created for each one within the same solution. Okay, we can see in our EXE that we still have our single source program and our resource file, which will be linked in automatically. Our goal here is to keep things as similar to NetExpress as possible. For our DLL, we have all the programs that made up the DLL originally. If we look at our properties for our main program, we can see it has an output name, mfsupportinfo.exe, and it's a console application. Okay. For copybooks, it read in the copy environment variable that was set in the project properties, and it is now pointing to that folder containing the copybooks, so they'll be picked up in Visual COBOL as well. On the COBOL tab, our directives were brought in. This is a directive you may have to add yourself, this remove directive. If you start seeing errors reported in Visual COBOL for maybe some of your data items are now being have the same name as what are now reserved words in Visual COBOL, if you're coming from an older product, you can use the remove directive to remove those as reserved words so you can continue to use them as data items without getting warnings. Okay. Our output path is also set to debug, which is non-standard for Visual Studio. Normally you would see a path like bin x86 debug or bin x86 release, but in order to keep things as closely related to NetExpress as possible, we use the same folder names too. So the output will all go to the debug folder. Okay. On the link tab, we can see that we have our entry point here, MF Support Info, console based, and link for dynamic. If we look at the DLL properties under the link, we can see that those import libraries for the Windows APIs are also brought in. So we should be able to build this, rebuild solution. Now we can see that it's building, but there's some warnings that are being generated. Okay, now these are all valid warnings. The reason we're seeing them here in Visual COBOL and not in NetExpress is that a setting has changed. On the COBOL tab, if you look at the warning level, in Visual COBOL it's now set to level W by default, which means to generate warnings. In NetExpress it's actually set to this level E by default, so warnings will not be shown. If you wanted the same you wanted the same output as you got in NetExpress, you could set that to level E for each of your projects. And here I'll set it for the executable as well. And then we'll rebuild our solution. Those errors should go away. Those warnings should go away now. If we look down here, they have. So now you get the same behavior. Okay. When this is run, it's set to set the working directory to the project folder, which is non-standard for Visual Studio. Normally the debug folder would be the default current directory, but again, to maintain compatibility with NetExpress, that's set by default. So if we run this, we can see we get the same output that we did under NetExpress. So although it's not completely standard with how Visual Studio works, it is a real quick and easy way to get your NetExpress projects into Visual COBOL. The next tool is the Project from Existing Code wizard. If you are using NetExpress but do not use project files, or if you use a different product and have your source files located in one or more folders, then the Create Project from Existing Code wizard may be an ideal tool for you. This wizard will create a new Visual COBOL project by importing files located within one or more specified folders. The tool will recognize COBOL files such as source and copybooks from a list of common file extensions. You may modify this list for your own requirements. Let's take a closer look. To demonstrate the project from existing code wizard, we'll use the same application that we did previously, which is the MF Support Info utility. Only this time we won't be using a NetExpress project file. We'll just be importing the source code from this folder directly. Okay, to start this wizard, we go under New, Project from Existing Code. Okay, and you can choose the type of project that you want. Micro Focus COBOL is the type. We click Next, and now we can navigate to where we want the new project to be. And we will just put it into the same folder as the source, and we have that under the examples folder in MF Support Info. Okay, so you just point to the folder. Okay, we can give it a new project name. I'll call it MF Support Info VC for Visual COBOL. The project type, in order to keep it the same, it's a console application. Now you can choose to add the files from these folders to the project, or you can exclude them. We want to bring them in, so we'll keep this checked. If you also wanted to search for the subfolders that are underneath this folder, then you would check this box, and we do because we have a subfolder called MF Support Copy Files containing our copybooks. So we want those to be picked up. So we check that. We could add additional folders here if we had our source in multiple locations. The file types, by default, it gives you common COBOL file extensions. If you have some that are not in the list, such as maybe a dialog system screen set that you want to bring in, you can add that to the list, like so, separated by a semicolon. Okay. If you want to add copybooks that it finds directly to the Solution Explorer window, you can check this. If not, when it finds the copybooks, it'll put their folder that it finds them in into the Project Properties copybook folders. Okay, we click Next. We can choose the type of configuration to build. We want to keep this the same, so we'll make it a native 32-bit. And we click Finish, and it will go ahead and create our project for us. Okay, now this has no knowledge of how these files should be arranged, such as we had them before as a EXE and a DLL. So if we wanted to go ahead and do that, we'd need to do some additional work here. We can see that it creates a single project with the name that we gave it, and it's placed it into that folder, the MF Support Info folder. Okay, if we look at the properties, it does create it as a console application, and it picks up the copybooks. It finds those in that subfolder and adds that to the copybooks path. Okay, some of our other items are not set how we want them, but it does use a output path, a standard Visual Studio output path of bin x86 debug. Okay. In order to make this like it was, a few things that we have to do. First of all, we can create a new project from this for our DLL, and we can do that by selecting the files that we want in our new project. And here they happen to be in order, so we can just select them all and right-click and say Create Project. Okay, we can give it a project name. We'll give it the same that we were using before, and it will place this new project into the same folder as the original project. Okay, output type is a library that will create a DLL. You could also choose a console app or a Windows app. Okay, it's not a managed project. Exclude selection from original project. That means it will remove those source files from the original and just move them into the new project, which is what we want. So we click OK. It'll go ahead and do that. Now we have two projects in our solution. the main exe and then the DLL. Okay, there are some additional properties that we need to change in order to get this to compile and run successfully. If we click on the properties for the main program, under COBOL Link, we make that a shared dynamic. It is a console application. Everything else should be okay for that one. For the MF Support Live project, on the Link tab, we also had the Windows API import libraries that we need to add in, and we can do that here by just clicking on it and selecting the libraries and putting open. That will add them into the Link with Lives. Okay, and we also make that one dynamic as well. Now we should be able to build this. Okay, we're getting those same warnings that we did from the NetExpress project, but we'll ignore those for now. If we run this, actually we need to change the startup project. We can do that here, set a startup to make sure that the exe is the main startup, and we can see that it runs like it did before. Now the reason this is running correctly is that both have the same output folder, which is the .bin x86 debug is specified in both the support live and in the MF support info, and these are created at the same level, so these files end up in the same location, so it can find the DLL. Otherwise we might have problems. Our next tool is similar to the previous tool, except that it does not automatically create our project for us. So after creating a new project using standard Visual Studio methods, we can use the Add Existing COBOL Items dialog to select a folder containing our COBOL application files and import them directly into our project. If the project folder is different than the selected COBOL folder, then links to the original files will be added to the project. The tool will recognize COBOL files such as source and copybooks from a list of common file extensions. You may modify this list for your own requirements. Let's look at an example. Okay, so our first step is to create a new project. Native console. We will be using our MF support info example again. And here we can give it a new name. Okay, and I'll put it in the examples folder and create a directory for it. Okay, now if everything were in just a single project, this would be fine, but to maintain our compatibility with our original example, we'll create a second project here. So we'll say add new project, and it'll be a link library, and we'll call that MF support live. So we'll have a DLL project and an EXE project. Okay. Now these program ones that are created by default, we can get rid of those. We won't be needing those. Okay. In order to import our COBOL items, we can right-click on the project and say Add Existing COBOL Items, and that gives us a dialog where we can specify the folders that we want to import from. Here we're going to look at our original support info folder and select that. Again, you can add to these types if you want, if you have non-standard types, and whether or not you want to add the copybooks directly to Solution Explorer. Okay, we have our same option here to add subfolders, and we do want to because we have our copybooks in a subfolder, and those will be recognized. So if we click on Finish, you can see that it's added our files in. Now these files are not being copied in. This tool actually adds a link to the existing location, so it keeps them where they were and just adds a link to the project. Okay, in order to make this the same as it was before, we're only interested in a couple of files for this original project, so we can select everything up to here and say exclude from the project, so we only get the files that we're interested in. Now for our DLL, we can do the same thing, add existing COBOL files, point to our original folder, and keep everything the same here. Okay, and now for this one, the only two we need to get rid of are the ones that are in our other project, so we can exclude these. Now it's pretty much set up the way that it was before. Okay, if we look at our properties, a few things that we need to change to get it to work the same way. It is a console application. The copybooks are picked up and that path is added to the projects. Okay, on our COBOL tab, we can change our warning level. First of all, we have an output path of bin x86 debug. This will cause us a problem, and I will demonstrate that in a minute. Okay, everything else should be okay. The link, we want to make it dynamic. So using this method, you really have to know all the settings that you want to use. For the support lib, it will also be dynamic, and again we need to add in our libraries because it's making Windows API calls, so you have to do a lot of things manually using this method. Okay. I also wanted to change the warning level in this project as well, so we don't get our warnings, and then do a build. And our solution should build fine, and it did. If we try to run this, and I'll run this under debug, we'll show a common problem that people run into. When we try to load our MF support lib DLL, we're actually finding that it can't be loaded. So the project cannot run, the program cannot run. And this is because we created two new projects. And they're both at the same level, but each one has its own build folder. So in the bin x86 debug for the exe, we have the exe. And for the lib, the DLL is in its own debug folder. So it cannot find the DLL. Okay, there are a couple ways around this, but probably the best way is to modify the output folder so they use the same output folder. And you can do that because of the level that these projects are on. We could put the output folder relative to the solution instead of to the project, which would be to do .. and then give it a name. I'll just call it output bin. The .. means to go back a level from the project, which is the solution folder. So if we did this for each of these, they would be pointing at the same folder. And if we did a rebuild, and if we run this again, we can see that now the DLL is loaded correctly. If we run to completion, our program runs just fine. And that's because now we have a output bin folder that contains both the exe and the DLL. This is a common problem that you may run into. So we're seeing that now we have to do a little bit more manual, but we have a little more control over what our projects look like. And our final method of importing existing code is to simply use the existing items dialog. This can be used to add any existing file to a specified project. This method allows complete control over which files are added and whether the files are copied to the project folder or simply linked to their original location. Let's take a look. Okay, we start out the same way that we did with our previous tool, which is to create a new project. We can get rid of the default file and we'll create our two projects as we did before. That will be a link library. Okay, and delete that. Now instead of adding files using our add existing COBOL items, we can just say add new or add existing item, and then we can go and select which items we want to add. And this can be any type of file. Here it's under COBOL file, but we can choose any file type. What we want to add to our main, we just select the ones that we're interested in. That would be the source program here. Okay, if we wanted to add a different file type, such as the resource file, we can do so in the same manner. Here I could just say RC, and it'll show us the RC file, and we can add that in. We can go to our second project and do the same thing, existing item. Here we want to go back to COBOL files and to our original location and select the files that we want, which would be everything except the MF support info file. So here everything is manual. Okay, so now that we have our files in, we have to change our properties. It's set to console application. Here the copybooks are not picked up by default, so you have to manually add those in, and we can do that by browsing to our location, which is examples, MS support info, and our copy files folder. Okay, so we can copy this because we'll need it also in our other project. So if I paste that in, we'll do the same thing here. Okay, if we go back and continue on for COBOL, I think everything is set okay here. We can change our wording level to be the same as what NetExpress is. Okay, our output path will have the same problem that we did before, so we want to change this right away to be relative to the solution folder. And we want to change this for both. COBOL link, change to dynamic. Okay, for our MF support live, change that to dynamic. We add our libraries in as we did before. Okay, and we need to change our output folder to be the same so that it can find the DLL. Okay, we'll change our warning level here as well and rebuild. So everything is done manually using this method, and you can add these types of files, any types of files, to any type of project. Okay, here if we now run a program, it runs fine. And that brings us to the end of this presentation of importing existing COBOL applications. Thank you for watching, and happy programming.